Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive looking at water healing rituals. We'll be exploring Manifest Wellness, my empowering spiritual water healing rituals. It's really got me thinking about all the ways water is seen as this sacred spiritual thing by so many different cultures.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? The way the author talks about their own connection to water, like it's a spiritual lifeline. It really seems to resonate with this broader idea of water being so much more than just, well, water.
Totally. When I read that spiritual lifeline part, I don't know, it just clicked for me. And I started thinking about how we're all mostly water. Like maybe that's part of why we feel so drawn to it?
That's a really cool thought. The author also makes this connection between water and femininity, which adds a whole other layer of symbolism to think about.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, think about all the powerful goddesses throughout history who are linked to water. Isis in ancient Egypt, Aphrodite in Greece. They're not just about giving life, but also about, like, purification and transformation.
Right, like rebirth. It makes you wonder if that connection to femininity is part of what makes water so powerful in terms of spiritual renewal. And it's not just a personal feeling either, right? There are so many examples throughout history of cultures incorporating water into their spiritual practices.
Absolutely. And in so many different ways. Like, take the ancient Egyptians and the Nile River. I mean, it was central to their entire existence, not just for survival, but for their whole belief system.
Their god Sobek, the one with the crocodile head.
Yes,
Ugh.
exactly. He represented the power and fertility of the Nile.
It's like water was more than just a resource, it was sacred to them.
Exactly.
And then you have the Aztecs with their goddess Chalkiyotlicu,
Oh, yeah.
who was all about water and freshwater lakes.
She was a really important deity for them, symbolizing life and renewal.
Just like the rain that helped their crops grow.
Exactly.
So again, it's not just about the practical stuff, it's tied into their whole belief system.
It's like water is woven into the very fabric of their culture.
And that idea continues even today, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Like Jewish purification rituals, Christian baptism, Hindu practices in the Ganges. It's fascinating how water transcends cultural boundaries, like this common thread that connects so many different faiths and traditions.
It really makes you think about how these ancient practices are finding their way into modern spirituality.
Right. And speaking of modern practices, the book talks about ayahuasca,
Oh, wow.
that
Yes.
brew they use in those indigenous rituals in the Amazon. And it seems like it's becoming more popular in some religious ceremonies too.
Ayahuasca is a powerful one.
Right.
The author describes these retreats where people drink it to have visions and reach a higher state of consciousness. It's like they believe it helps them deal with past trauma, connect with something bigger than themselves, even heal on a deep level.
The author makes it sound intense, even challenging at times, but ultimately leading to this feeling of spiritual cleansing and renewal.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes you think about how that fits into this whole idea of water being used for purification.
Right. We see it everywhere. Sweat lodges in Native American traditions,
hmm
ritual baths with herbs and oils.
Even just washing your hands before a meal can take on a symbolic meaning.
Totally. It's like water has this inherent power to wash away not just dirt, but spiritual impurities too.
Exactly.
And speaking of sweat lodges, the book talks about how some Native American tribes use them for spiritual connection and healing.
They're basically these enclosed spaces heated with stones to create steam. It's supposed to be pretty intense.
Yeah, the author described it as like a symbolic death and rebirth. You sweat out all these toxins, both physical and emotional. It's a way to purify your body and mind and connect with the earth and their ancestors.
That's a great way to put it.
So it's not just about the physical detoxification, it's also about mental and emotional release.
Absolutely. And it's a communal experience, too. You're supporting each other through this intense heat, sharing in that vulnerability and transformation.
So the sweat lodge becomes this space for healing on multiple levels: physical, emotional, and spiritual. I'm wondering though, is there a risk of cultural appropriation when we start adopting practices like sweat lodges or ayahuasca from cultures that aren't our own? How can we approach these traditions respectfully and avoid just taking what seems cool without understanding the deeper context?
That's such an important question. And something we should all be thinking about when we're exploring spiritual practices from different cultures. It's about approaching these things with humility, seeking guidance from those who hold the knowledge, and understanding the history and cultural significance behind them. It's not about just appropriating what seems trendy or exotic.
Right. It's about engaging with it in a respectful and meaningful way.
Exactly.
That's a really important point to remember. We need to be aware of the potential for harm and be sensitive and respectful.
Definitely. But the beautiful thing about exploring different spiritual practices is that it can open our minds to new ways of connecting with the sacred, even if we don't end up adopting those practices ourselves.
I like that.
It's about expanding our understanding of the human experience and appreciating the richness of human spirituality.
Totally. So we've talked about water as the source of life, a symbol of femininity, and this powerful tool for purification and spiritual connection. But I'm curious, what other ways do cultures around the world incorporate water into their rituals and beliefs?
Well, let's dive into that in part 2 of our deep dive. We'll explore all sorts of different water rituals, from ceremonial baths to sacred springs, and uncover all the amazing ways water is used to heal, cleanse, and connect with the divine.
Welcome back to our deep dive into water healing rituals. I'm really excited to keep exploring this topic. In the first part, we talked about how water is revered by so many cultures, how it's often linked to femininity and spiritual cleansing. Now I'm curious to hear about other kinds of rituals, beyond what we already discussed.
It's amazing how many different ways people use water in rituals. I mean, it's as versatile as it's essential for life, right? We've touched on sweat lodges and ayahuasca, but there's a whole world of practices out there that use water for healing, purification, connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
Okay, so what are some examples? The book mentioned ceremonial baths, but didn't go into a ton of detail. I've definitely tried baths with Epsom salts after a long day, but I never thought of it as a ritual.
That's where the intention comes in, right? It's like, the difference between just eating and having a mindful meal.
Right.
A ritual bath is about consciously creating a space for healing and transformation. You might use certain herbs or oils, even crystals, each one chosen for its symbolic meaning and energy.
So each ingredient adds another layer to the intention.
Yeah,
Do
exactly.
you have any favorite examples?
Well, in some traditions, they use rose petals for self-love and healing, lavender for calming anxiety, or sea salt for purification and grounding.
Wow, so many options.
It's fascinating how these natural elements can enhance the spiritual and emotional benefits of a bath.
I'm starting to see how a simple bath can become so much more. What about those healing springs the author talked about? Are those literally springs that are believed to have healing powers?
Yeah, in many cultures, certain springs or bodies of water are seen as sacred. People believe they have special healing properties.
So, like, people bathe in them.
Exactly. They might also drink the water or even just sit by the water to meditate and absorb its energy.
Interesting. It reminds me of wishing wells, but on a grander scale. What do you think it is about water that makes people believe it has this power to heal?
I think it goes back to that deep connection we all have with water. It's the source of life. We naturally associate it with cleansing and renewal.
Right.
Plus, water is incredibly receptive to energy. Maybe that's why so many cultures believe it can be infused with intentions and used for healing.
That's really interesting. It makes me wonder about how we use water in our everyday lives, like washing our hands, taking a shower. Do you think those actions could also be seen as rituals, even if we're not consciously doing them for that purpose?
That's a great question. I think even mundane things like that can become rituals if we approach them with intentionality. Like imagine washing your hands and visualizing all the stress and negativity going down the drain.
Yeah.
Or taking a shower and feeling the water cleanse not just your body, but your spirit too.
I like that. It's about shifting our perspective and finding those moments of connection with water, even in our everyday routine.
Exactly. And speaking of connecting with water, the author talks about how different phases of the moon can influence the energy of water
Yes.
and make certain rituals more potent.
Oh, yeah. Aligning your baths with the lunar cycle. I've heard of that, but I've never tried it.
It's based on the idea that the moon's gravitational pull affects the tides.
Right.
And since our bodies are mostly water,
Mm-hmm.
we're also influenced by its cycles.
Makes sense.
Each phase of the moon is associated with different energies.
So, like, a new moon would be a good time for new beginnings?
Exactly. You might take a bath with sea salt and herbs to symbolize a fresh start. As the moon waxes, you could focus on attracting what you want into your life. Maybe add some rose petals or lavender to your bath for love and prosperity.
That sounds lovely. And then a full moon bath would be more about, what, letting go?
More like amplifying your intentions and manifesting your desires. Some people use crystals like amethyst or quartz in their full moon rituals.
Oh, interesting.
And as the moon wanes, it's a good time for releasing negativity and letting go of things that no longer serve you. Epsom salts and sage are popular for waning moon baths.
Okay, this is starting to sound really interesting. It's like Each moon phase gives you an opportunity to work with different energies and intentions.
It's a really cool way to connect to the rhythms of nature.
It is. And speaking of connecting with nature, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive into these water healing rituals. And honestly, this whole conversation has really changed how I think about water. It's so much more than just something we drink or bathe in.
It has been quite a journey, right? From ancient goddesses to modern moon rituals. It really is amazing how water is such a big part of so many cultures and spiritual practices.
In the last part, we were talking about how water can be infused with intentions. And it got me thinking about the sacred springs and rivers. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Like, water is this powerful force that can cleanse and heal, but it's also super vulnerable to pollution and overuse.
Yeah, it's a real paradox for sure. This thing that gives us life is facing all these threats.
Yeah.
And we have to protect it, not just for the environment, but for the people who see these water sources as sacred.
Right, like the Ganges River in India. Millions of people believe it can purify their souls, but it's also really polluted. It's like this clash between the sacred and the practical.
It's definitely a complex issue. We need to find that balance between our need for water and preserving its sanctity and protecting these fragile ecosystems.
So what can we do? I mean, I try to be mindful of how much water I use, like taking shorter showers and stuff, but sometimes it feels like a drop in the bucket.
Every little bit counts, but you're right. Individual actions can only go so far. We need bigger changes, like policies that make water conservation a priority and protect our water sources from pollution.
That makes sense. But what about the spiritual side of things? Like, how can we honor the sacredness of water beyond just using less of it?
I think it starts with awareness, recognizing that water isn't just a commodity, but a life-giving force that deserves our respect and gratitude.
Okay, I see that.
And we can bring that awareness into our daily lives, even in small ways.
Like what? Can you give me some examples?
Sure, like imagine being more mindful when you turn on the tap. Think about where that water came from, the journey it took to get to you.
That's interesting.
Or maybe say a silent thank you before you drink a glass of water, recognizing how essential it is for life.
I like that. Bringing that reverence into everyday moments with water.
Exactly. And maybe through those little acts of awareness and gratitude, we can start to shift our collective consciousness and create a better relationship with water.
This whole deep dive has been so thought-provoking. I'm definitely walking away with a new appreciation for water. Not just what it does for us, but the spiritual meaning it holds. And how it connects us to something bigger.
I hope it's inspired you to explore your own connection with water, whether that's through creating your own rituals, supporting efforts to protect our waterways, or just being more mindful of this precious resource in your everyday life.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating journey, and I'm excited to keep learning about water healing rituals. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. May we all strive to honor and protect water for ourselves, our communities, and the planet.